Welcome back to What Can Brown Jazz Vinyl. The topic for today is this right here. Actually, this one, a brand new release by Alice Coltrane called Ptah the El Daoud. I do believe that is the correct pronunciation. I know some people are telling me that you need to pronounce the P, so it's Ptah, I suppose. I had an equal number of Google search results that told me the P was silent, as I did ones that said that you should pronounce the P. So in any event, I'm going to, in this video, refer to it as Ptah the El Daoud, and we can argue about that in the comments perhaps. So I actually referenced this, this album was coming out, I want to say in a video about a month ago. And in that video, I referenced, just a number of new releases, but two of them are on this new, well, I'll say newly relaunched series called Verve By Request. So the two releases that came out just the other day on November 11th included Ptah the El Daoud, as well as Beat by Roy Brooks. I actually ended up picking up both of them, even though I have original pressings of each of them, just because I wanted to know what the deal was. But I'm also kind of dipping my toe, I would say, carefully into this new series. Because it's new, I don't know really what to expect. I don't know if they're going to do a great job. I just didn't know what the end product was going to be, because this is brand new. So you don't want to sort of, pre-order everything, I suppose, without first experimenting. So anyway, in this video, I plan to address, I guess, some of those open questions, right? Is this a worthwhile series? Does it sound good, at least with this particular title? And I'm also going to take some time to compare it sort of sonically to the original pressing. So I guess a couple of things up front before we get into that. I want to talk a little bit more about what this series is and what you get. So Verve By Request, what they are saying with this series is a couple of things. Firstly, each of these titles are being newly remastered from original analog sources when available. What that means is some of them may be sort of all analog and other ones may have a digital step. Some may be all digital, I'm not sure. So, I'm the sort of person that I guess I don't really care. I suppose I like to know maybe about the process, but I've heard plenty of albums on vinyl that sound great even when they have that digital step. And so it's not a deal breaker. I don't even know necessarily that I would pay more for something that promises to be all analog. I think that the main point for me is I just want it to sound really good. So again, that's sort of an open question that I'll at least attempt to answer in this video. So a little bit more about the series. These are all being pressed on 180 gram vinyl at Third Man Pressing in Detroit. Now, each of these titles is going to have the regular edition, which is what this is, and then it's also going to have a limited edition that is on yellow vinyl and with like yellow toned covers. So it looks like what they're doing, almost like you're looking through like a yellow like screen or something, or a yellow like gel, and you're looking at the cover. So it is this cover, but it's all in yellow. I don't really know what to say about that, honestly. I think a lot of people, when they are looking for some of these albums, especially this one that hasn't had a decent reissue in a really long time, if ever, you want something that's as close to the original in every way that you can. Both the music, obviously, you want it to sound you want it to sound good, you want it to sound how it's supposed to sound, but you also kind of want a cover that approximates, I think, what the original looks like. So Third Man is doing this yellow variety, and I had the opportunity to pick that up, but I just didn't want to. So I'm sure that there's going to be plenty of folks out there who are going to want that limited edition because it's limited, or for those folks who collect some of the color variants. But that's just not my style. So I went with the regular edition, but no shade against anybody who wants to go for that limited edition. So a couple of other things. This Coltrane title and Beat are not the only ones they've announced. So there's a whole series leading up into June associated with this series. So if you end up liking, if you end up wanting them all, then you kind of want to know when they're coming out. But if you like one of these early titles and you think it sounds good, and that might make you want to get one of the other ones in the series, because presumably it's going to sound good as well. So I'm just going to really quickly run down that list just so that you know when they're coming out. So as I mentioned, Beat as well as Ptah the El Daoud came out on November 11th. coming up on December 9th, we have James Brown's Soul on Top. Also on December 9th, we have Mel Brown's Chicken Fat. That's another Impulse title. Let's see, January 13th, Ahmad Jamal, The Awakening. That one is going to be a popular one. Also on January 13th, we have Archie Shepp's Kwanzaa. On February 10th, there are two titles. Dorothy Ashby, the Rubaiyat of Dorothy Ashby. I don't know how to pronounce that word, and I have that album, the Vinyl Me Please version. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sorry. You also have Gabor Szabo's The Sorcerer. Gabor Szabo's The Sorcerer. March 10th, you have Blossom Deary's Self-Titled, which is also a Vinyl Me Please title. This is weird. Also on March 10th, Eartha Kitt's Bad But Beautiful. On April 28th, you have Yusef Lateef, Psychosomotus. That's a Impulse title. Also on April 28th, you have Pharoah Sanders' Black Unity. May 26th, Wayne Shorter, Footprints Live. Actually don't know enough about that one. May 26th, Herbie Hancock's The New Standard. On June 30th is Albert Eiler's Love Cry, and also on June 30th is Sun Ra's Space is the Place. So, I would say that there are some similarities in terms of this lineup. You do have a heavy amount of this sort of spiritual jazz thing. You have some free jazz in there. You also have some funk, and then some sort of variations of. So it's an interesting lineup, not just because there's a number of great titles there, but also because some of these have recently had other reissues. And so it kind of makes you wonder, like, you know, what's going to be different? Are we going to be in a situation where you have just more and more labels kind of reissuing the same stuff? And plus, why are so many labels reissuing Impulse? Shouldn't Impulse be reissuing Impulse? But instead, you know, Impulse has some titles. Acoustic Sounds puts out some of their titles, and they've done a great job. And now you have Verve By Request releasing Impulse titles. So I don't know enough about the decision criteria on who is releasing what. Maybe if it's the all analog stuff, then Acoustic Sounds gets first dibs. Just throwing stuff out there, have no idea. But you know, here's the thing. With this title, hasn't been released in a while. There's been a bootleg out there that apparently doesn't sound great. I don't think anybody should be complaining about the fact that somebody has decided that they want to really, reissue this title. So anyway, that's that for the rest of this video. I want to talk more about Ptah the El Daoud, both in terms of what the original pressing sounds like, as well as my thoughts on this new reissue. All right, so first up, just a couple of words about this album before we get into it. So this album was put out in 1970. I believe this was Alice Coltrane's third album as a solo artist. The one that she would have just put out would have been Huntington Ashram Monastery, I believe. So this one came right after that. Again, 1970, released on Impulse. It was actually recorded in her, I believe, basement on Long Island. So you'll oftentimes see on, you know, the back jacket of Alice Coltrane's work that it'll say recorded in like the Coltrane family studio or something like that. But that was sort of a, I don't want to say just makeshift, because I'm sure it was very nice. But yeah, it was in her, the basement of her home is where this album was recorded. In this case, the audio engineer was a guy named Wallace. I believe the pronunciation of his last name is Barnicky. So Wallace Barnicky. He also did Universal Consciousness, which was another Coltrane title, Alice Coltrane title. He also worked on Reflection on Creation in Space. This was a guy who wasn't that prolific, I don't think, in terms of his actual engineering work on individual albums. He did end up creating his own studio or founding his own studio in 1972. And he recorded Roberta Flack, Dee Dee Bridgewater, Melvin Van Peebles, some other artists, but, you know, wasn't hugely prolific, I would say. So in any event, though, you know, I think he's an important piece to the puzzle on this one, at least in terms of how this music sounds, both on the original as well as in the reissue. So what else about this album? I mean, this is one of those titles that I would say probably the most in demand out of anything in Alice Coltrane's catalog. And I think part of that is because, part of it probably is because of scarcity. There really haven't been too many reissues of this album, but that kind of cheats the subject matter. I mean, this is a phenomenal album. It really is. And I think it was a, you know, important piece of sort of the what I'm going to call spiritual jazz kind of genre. I know that that's a problematic term. I think it helps, at least in terms of like communicating maybe what people can expect from this album who haven't heard it before. And you know, some of those components, right, are going to be sort of, you know, it takes from modal jazz. Some of it's the instrumentation, and some of it is this kind of the sort of evolving post-bop into like free jazz kind of thing that was going on, that kind of characterizes some of that music, some of this music. But I understand that spiritual jazz is a problematic term for some people, and so I always hesitate to use it. But again, in this case, I think that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be able to hear this music for the first time, just because there haven't been many versions available. And it at least, I suppose, helps someone understand maybe what they're getting into. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. So on this album, you have obviously Alice Coltrane. She plays both piano, in fact, predominantly piano here, but she also plays harp on, I think, one track, maybe more. Now I think it's just one out of the 4 tracks. You've got Ben Riley on drums, you've got Ron Carter on bass, and then you have 2 tenor players, right? You have Joe Henderson and you have Pharoah Sanders. They actually don't just play tenor; they play flute as well on this album. So that's kind of that's the lineup. And now, I mean, let's kind of dig into, I guess, a little bit of a track by track comparison between these two versions. All right, so let's first start out with the original copy. So this is my original pressing. Had it for a little while. Happens to be a promo. You'll find a lot of the original copies that I've amassed over the years. I ended up, for whatever reason, deciding to prioritize promos. There's actually a time when they were even less desirable, right? Because they had different labels or they had stickers on them and stuff. And a lot of collectors actually specifically didn't want to have the promos. So you'd be surprised. I mean, nowadays some of this stuff is more collectible, but then it wasn't necessarily. But you know, this is what the gatefold looks like. You know, anyway, getting to the music here. So if I can get this thing to stay up. So the title track, Ptah the El Daoud, is the opening track on this album, and it kind of opens with this sort of like march feel, I would say, in terms of the piano playing these like bass clef sort of chords that really just set up this tone again of it sort of being a march. And then it's sort of layered with unison sax, so both Henderson as well as Sanders that sort of then offer these like lines that go over it. I would say that it's pretty dynamic, even just as is on this original pressing. So there's one sax in each channel. So Henderson is in the left, and he actually offers the first solo. It's nicely balanced, I think, is probably the best way to characterize it in terms of drums, bass, and piano backing the soloist. Pharoah does come in later, and he is in the right channel. And I actually think that this is pretty helpful, because when you have 2 tenors, or in some situations 2 flutes here, if they were both together, they'd sort of be, you know, a little bit less distinct. You wouldn't necessarily be able to hear these individual musicians, but because they are separated into the left and the right, and they happen to be playing the same instruments and a lot of unison lines, I think it actually it adds quite a bit. And that was just, I think, probably a good choice in terms of how they recorded it. So in terms of the sonics, I mean, there's a lot of detail, I would say, especially in the drums, and what I mean maybe more specifically is the cymbals. The piano does sound great too, and it's actually sort of right in the center. Let's see, there's a drum solo section here that's kind of towards like well into the track that has decent detail, and when it picks up the sort of march tempo, you really get a sense, I think, of the depth of the bass, the detail in the drums, and just everything really sounds great. So that's the first track on the original. And I'm actually going to now jump to the first track on the reissue, and then we'll kind of jump back and forth a little bit as the tracks go. So on this reissue, the bass is definitely more prominent, and it's more detailed, I would say, but not that much more so. I would say that it's not only is that not really a significant improvement, I would say that there isn't really a significant improvement elsewhere either. In terms of some of the other details, let's see. It's possible that Henderson's sax is softer, I would say relative to the rhythm section, or maybe just that the rhythm section is brought out more on this reissue. But I actually thought that the balance was really well done on the original pressing. And so in comparison, it just feels like Henderson's sax is pushed to the back. It's a little bit softer and more muted, I would say, than I would like to hear. I honestly would expect, because of what I know about Henderson's tone and because of what I know about Sanders' tone, I would expect them to be like harsher and sort of punchier. And instead, if anything, it kind of feels a little bit smoothed. So overall, I would say I think that the rhythm section eclipses the two saxophonists. And that's not necessarily a good thing, I would say, especially when you consider who we're talking about. Even Pharoah sounds a little bit muted in favor of rhythm later on when he comes in. Generally speaking, the reissue sounds a little bit more polished in terms of that smoothness. But because I feel like the saxophonists aren't quite as prominent, it just feels like, I don't know, it feels to me like they should just have a little bit more of an aggressive sound. And I don't know that the overall package, at least in terms of this reissue, is that much of an improvement versus the original. And in fact, I would say that it is not quite as good as the original. So a little bit, I don't know, I was kind of conflicted, right? Because I did notice a little bit more detail here and there, but overall, I think the balance is what helped the original stand out, at least in terms of the title track. All right, so the next track is called Turiya and Ramakrishna. And when it comes to this original pressing, the first thing that jumps out to me are actually the drums and specifically the brushwork. And what I found is that they don't sound as detailed as maybe I would like, and they actually sound a little bit unnatural, almost like it's possible that the drum kit was in its own like sort of designated room, and not with the rest of the musicians, just because it feels like it has a little bit of a different sound, and it's not exactly a good thing either. I would say that overall the track is still very well balanced, which is good, and overall it does sound great. There are bells being played in the left channel, and I don't know if that was it could be Henderson playing them, or it could be somebody else that sort of give what is otherwise a sort of blues-inspired piece that Alice Coltrane is playing, kind of lends like a little bit more of a spiritual vibe to it, which I think is nice. Towards the end of this track, there's a very stark bass part, Ron Carter's bass that just sounds phenomenal. And it's actually quite detailed as well, as Carter sort of bends these lower register notes as he's playing. So there is still plenty of to like in this original version of it. But I did notice a few things that maybe weren't quite as good as, say, I thought that opening track was. When it comes to this reissue, let's see. So I don't think I set this up earlier, but so the drums are in the right channel, the bells and the bass are in the left, and then the piano is once again right in the center. In this track, it sounds really, really nice, probably because of what I mentioned before. So if you remember on that first track, I said that the balance issue was because of the presence of the saxophonists, but that the reissue did a good job of the rhythm section and they brought them forward. So I think here, the rhythm section was brought forward and it sounds great, and it's not at the expense of any saxophonists because there are none. It is really just the rhythm section here. So it's a stark piece. It's quiet. I think it really benefits from the ability of sort of modern pressings to eliminate the noise floor. There isn't really that much of a noise floor on here, but there's certainly not one here. As an aside, I always find it funny. People post like comments about new reissues that they get, and they say dead quiet. They say like, oh, this one's so quiet, it's dead quiet. And I think what they're referring to is the noise floor. But that's always so funny to me because modern pressings of almost anything don't have a noise floor, and they're all going to be quiet. They're not going to have like pops or like crackle or anything like that, or at least they shouldn't. So I don't know. I find it funny when people say, oh, like, oh, my copy's dead quiet. And it's like, yeah, I think they all are. I think all of these reissues are going to be are going to be quiet. Anyway, let's see what else. The bass detail here, I would say, sounds good, but maybe not quite as good as on the original. So that might be one like subtle sort of element of this track that I think the original does a better job. I would say here that I don't think that there's a substantive improvement here enough for me to say definitively that one sounds better than the other. I think overall it sounds like more of a sort of modern, it sounds like a modern reissue, and it accentuates certain things, and it brings the the rhythm section forward, which is all there is here. But again, it wasn't like after playing these tracks back and forth, I didn't come away with it thinking like, oh, this one is so much better than the other. So I would actually kind of say on this particular track, it's a little bit of a wash between these two pressings. All right, track 3 is titled Blue Nile. And actually, I believe that this is the first time on this album that we're hearing Alice play harp. So it kind of changes a little bit in terms of like sort of some of the sonic elements. So let's see, on the original, bass and drums sound really nice, setting the stage for her sort of swirling, cascading lines on the harp. There's unison flute, and then quickly flute solos. So I believe that Henderson is still on the left and Sanders is still on the right, but they're both playing flute. Flute sounds really great here as well. I would say, if anything, maybe the harp is a little bit in the background compared to the flute, but I think that was probably just intentional. I mean, just because it's Alice doesn't mean she needs to be the center of attention throughout. This one is quite the nuanced track, I would say, with a lot going on and no sort of distinct melody. At times it feels like the flute, harp, bass, and drums are all equal players here. So again, I'm going to sound like a broken record here. The balance that I think this original pressing has really helps it stand out. The idea that there's no one that's sort of competing for space, or there's nobody that's hard to hear. It's just like a really, really nice balance. There is a lot of detail here, especially later in the track as Coltrane solos on harp. That is really nice in terms of how she's sort of plucking or strumming the strings, as the case may be. And I think that this track is probably the highlight of the album. It's just really nice, really engaging. I think everything you want from something that Alice Coltrane composed and recorded. So the two saxophonists, as I said, are on flute here, and they do play in unison at the end again. And it's the first time, I would say, it's funny that I don't think I noticed that they were unison at the beginning. It kind of sounded like it was just one flute, but then at the end I noticed when they were both there. And again, I think it's because you have that left and right channel that kind of cue you to the fact that it isn't just a single flute, but that you have these sort of these two flutists that are sometimes unison and sometimes not. But in any event, I mean, I like I said, I do think that this is the highlight, and I think that the star of this particular track is the balance when it comes to this original pressing. So on the reissue, a couple of things. The bass is definitely more prominent. I would say that it's boomier, as I like to say, not necessarily more detailed. I think that the sort of duet of flutes is really nice and moody. And I think I do probably hear more separation between the flutes on this reissue when both are playing. I don't know that it's more detailed. I just know that there feels like a little bit more separation between the actual flute parts. Like maybe some of the character of the actual notes may be missing a little bit, but you do have more separation, I guess, between the left and the right channel on this pressing. Let's see. So when I mentioned that I really enjoyed Coltrane's solo on harp, I think that it's nice here as well. The detail is nice, but it isn't significantly better than the original, and it might actually be somewhat less detailed. So where we're at here is, I think I'm going to probably give the edge on Blue Nile to the original. So the original one on the first track, I said it was a wash on the second. I think the original probably wins in the third. We've got one more track to discuss. All right, this final track is called Mantra. So a little bit about this. There's sort of the duo of saxes that set the foundation for this particular track. Ron Carter's sort of bowed bass kind of offers a tonal element to it that's really nice. Alice Coltrane is back on piano on this track. I would say the drums are quite bright here. So as I mentioned, I think on that first one, the cymbals especially very bright, sort of shimmering cymbals. And again, I think that that probably balance is how you'd best characterize the original pressing. This is the most challenging track of anything on the album, I would say. It's the most sort of the closest to free jazz. Seems a little bit more sort of experimental or whatever. And so it's a little bit harder to necessarily, I don't know, call out as many individual elements, but like I said, I think it sounds good. I think that the original pressing is quite balanced. In terms of the reissue, so the volume is definitely seems louder. I would say the bass is deeper. The saxes are definitely louder, noticeably so, and stand out more than on the original relative to the rhythm section. So I think here's an example where the reissue actually just sounds better. And I think it's mostly because of how the sax parts are brought out a little bit more. And then the sort of like thundering bass adds a lot of intensity. So I know that I'm kind of contradicting myself, right? Because I've been praising the original for its balance in some situations, but on this one I'm saying, no, the saxes are brought out and it sounds really nice. But remember, one of my problems was with this one on some of those other tracks is that the saxes are actually what was a little bit less, noticeable, or a little bit more muffled than what I would have expected. And so I think maybe my problem on some of these other tracks is when the saxes don't sort of have equal footing with the rest of the band. And I thought the original did a better job. Here, it's a little bit switched where the saxes are a little bit more front and center. And I actually think it adds a really nice element, makes this track very engaging and interesting to listen to. I would say that on this track as well, Pharoah gets to be a little bit more of what I would say is himself, rather than playing these sort of muted, more understated kind of lines. This is a little bit more of Pharoah, sort of quintessential Pharoah in his in an early part of his career, and I think it's nice here. So I would actually say on this particular track that the reissue is the better sounding version compared to the original. So kind of where we're at, I again, to sort of sum things up is, two tracks. The original one, there was a wash on one track, and then one track, the reissue is the clear winner for sure. So I kind of want to offer a little bit of a closing statement here. I know that these shootouts end up being, a little bit more sort of academic, right? About, picking out like, oh, I'm hearing this versus I'm hearing this. And the point of that kind of discussion is not to put down a particular release. It really is simply to let somebody know who might be thinking like, hey, I have an original. Is it going to be better if I get the reissue? Or for those people who don't have an original and are just wondering if it's worthwhile, they get a sense of like, where might my money be best spent? And considering how much the original pressings go for, I think it's probably clear that this reissue is a release that a lot of people have been waiting for, and now people who haven't been able to get the album can. So all that being said, I personally think that this reissue sounds great overall. So even though there's a few elements where it doesn't quite match up to the original in terms of balance, I don't think anybody's going to notice that. If this is the only one that you're listening to, this reissue on the Verve By Request label, I think you're going to be very happy with it. It does sound great overall. There's no like big problems with it. In fact, there's no real problems. It's just like subtle sonic differences between this and the original. And even taking so academic of an approach with this particular album feels almost like it shouldn't be done, because the album is such a classic. It's such an experience to listen to. I personally don't think anybody should listen to this and try to hear any of the things that I talked about in this video. I think you should just listen to it, because that's how good it is. So, I'm doing this for a purpose so that you can kind of understand the differences, because otherwise, what would I do? I would sit here and be like, oh, it sounds great. And I just have to leave it at that, right? One thing I will do while we're here is, I see this hype sticker, but maybe I'll keep it, maybe I won't. But I thought I'd just tear this shrink off and take a quick look inside, because I haven't done that yet. And then you can see what the inside looks like as well. So okay, looks exactly the same, right, as the original pressing. One other fun note that I thought was they actually made they made a mistake on the original cover. And what it does is, I don't know if this is going to be, no one's going to care about this, okay? But on track 2, where it says Turiya and, they have Alice Coltrane's name in parentheses right underneath that before they finish the title of Ramakrishna. And that doesn't match up with the rest of the tracks, okay? So that's a clear mistake. And anyway, what I thought was interesting is that they did the exact same thing on the reissue. So hopefully that's visible. So for anybody who's interested in this idea of like, are they doing a good job, I suppose, with kind of replicating the original, you know, I know that there's like, they brightened up the back and some people are like up in arms about that. But generally speaking, you know, I think that this does a good job of replicating what that original one looked like. For those of us who don't care about what the original looked like, you can get that yellow version, which looks like this. So, you know, both are available, and have at it, because this is great music. It deserves to be heard by everybody, and maybe now it can. So thanks for tuning in. Please go ahead and hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.